Okay, email is probably the least regulated channel for communicating people, but there are terms of use that affect Gmail and Outlook, and Pitchit does allow people to use Gmail and Outlook for communicating and qualifying leads, so it's important to talk about these terms of use. Furthermore, TCPA does apply some rules around email when it comes to email to text and closing that loophole. So we're going to kind of run through all of those things on this particular chapter. So let's start with Gmail. Now, these aren't necessarily TCPA laws, but they are CAN spam laws. And so you do need to follow CAN spam act laws if you want to be an active Gmail user. The other one, which is a fairly new rule that they've rolled out in their terms of use, is you got to keep reported spam rates below 0.3%. This is actually really hard to do, even with opted-in users. And so this will also include repeated unwanted contact. So even if you're not, quote unquote, like spamming someone, if they've asked you to contact them, if you don't make it really easy for them to opt out, they're probably just going to mark you as spam. And Google at Gmail will consider that spam, even if it's a TCPA compliant person and you're doing your best to contact them only after they've asked to be contacted. So some tips to help keep you eligible from going above 0.3% is that you need to maintain explicit opt-in mechanisms. A good example is on your site actually requiring them to click a checkbox, not just having it pre-checked. That's an opt-in mechanism where it required human involvement to opt in. Provide really clear disclosures. So even though you don't have to be TCPA compliant for emailing someone, it still helps reduce the amount of people who will effectively mark you as spam if you provide really clear disclosures to them on how you're going to contact them, which channels, why you're contacting them, what the use case is, who's contacting them, etc. So I still think you should follow TCPA rules even if you're not required to, because it could prevent you from going over 0.3% in reported spam. And so it would prevent you from losing your Gmail account, or at least reduce the amount of time it takes to lose your account for high volume Gmail messaging. Next one, record and retain that consent so you can always prove it to Gmail if they ever ask. Make clear the opt-out mechanisms. So this is actually going to prevent them from marking you as spam if you have like a really clear unsubscribe link, or if you say, hey, if you want to stop hearing from me, say stop. That will help prevent spam reports. And then finally, log all opt-out requests promptly and ensure immediate suppression from future contact of any channel, right? Because what you don't want to have happen is Pitchit writes to them on Gmail, they opt out, and then you go and text them something and they get angry and report you because it's not TCPA compliant now because they have opted out on Gmail, meaning that they are opted out of all future consent and you cannot call or text them anymore. And so Pitchit's really helpful here because we do consider an opt out on one channel and opt out from all channels. And so as long as it's within that workflow campaign and it has the same use case, an opt-out on any channel will kick them out of all channels. And that is the best way to prevent you from not only not breaking TCPA laws, but also not breaking Gmail's terms of use. Now, if you're violating CAN spam, you're probably not watching this video because you don't care about CAN spam and you're committing fraud. I can't really help those people. But for people who are being legitimate and want to prevent themselves from being marked a false positive of spamming someone when you're not, make sure you don't have repeated unwanted contact by following these tips. Next one, Outlook. It's a little different. You do still basically need to adhere to all applicable laws, which in this case is CAN spam if you're in the United States. Furthermore, though, they have another policy called the Microsoft Anti-Spam Policy, and it does include repeated unwanted contact. So even if you aren't, in your opinion, spamming someone, if they mark you as spam, Microsoft considers it spam if enough of them have marked you as spam, because they kind of consider it as you repeatedly writing to people who don't want it. Tips: maintain explicit opt-in, clear disclosures, record and retain consent, clear opt-out mechanisms, and log all opt-out. Very similar to Gmail, with only really that one added bit that they do have an anti-spam policy. Gmail has their own, but it's not called the anti-spam policy. It's just saying be below 0.3% spam rates, which actually makes it harder than Microsoft. It's harder to be compliant on Gmail because that's a really low percentage. Microsoft doesn't have a publicly listed percentage that they target, and so it's harder to get blocked on Outlook. It's easier to get blocked on Gmail. Final one. Now, this is actually TCPA protected, so make sure you're following these rules. But to combat fraudulent texts, that originated from email addresses. This was a loophole that really like iPhone was enabling, where if you basically emailed someone, it would send them an iMessage text. The FCC has officially closed this loophole. And so now mobile providers have to make email to text services opt-in only with a clear opt-in mechanism. So they have to go into their settings and actually opt into this. It's no longer by default selected. And this approach is just going to add a critical, I think, layer of protection for consumers against people using a loophole to spam or scam individuals with text messages that don't have to follow TCPA laws. So now they do, right? So long story short, this loophole's done. If you're doing this, stop doing it, etc. So that, without further ado, concludes compliance for email. Thank you.